Welcome back, everyone. I am so glad you are here with me today because I have another story to share with you, and this one really stayed with me. If you are new here, make sure you subscribe and hit that like button because we talk about real love stories here every single week. There was a 63-year-old piano teacher in Nashville who had not touched a love song in years. Not because she had forgotten how to play them, but because she had forgotten what they felt like. But then one evening, a 30-year-old man walked into her studio, sat down right beside her on that old wooden bench, and said something that made her hands start shaking over the keys. And after that, nothing in her life was ever the same again. Her name was Margaret Collins, and she had lived in the same house on Elm Street in Nashville, Tennessee for 31 years. House had a wraparound porch, a garden full of white hydrangeas, and a studio in the back where she had taught piano to hundreds of students over the decades. The walls of that studio were covered in recital programs and old photographs, and the faint smell of old wood and candle wax had soaked into every corner of the room. Margaret loved that studio more than anywhere else in the world because inside it she was not a widow or a lonely woman or someone whose children had grown up and moved far away. Inside it she was simply a teacher, and the music was always enough. She had been married to a man named Harold for 26 years. Harold was a quiet and steady man who loved baseball and strong coffee, and who always saved the last bite of dessert for her. When he passed away from a heart condition 6 years before our story begins, Margaret told her sister over the phone that she felt like someone had turned the volume down on everything. The colors looked the same. The sun still came up every morning. The hydrangeas still bloomed in May. But something underneath it all had gone completely silent. She kept teaching because teaching was the one thing that still made sense to her. She taught children, mostly little ones, whose feet did not yet reach the pedals, and teenagers who practiced reluctantly, and sometimes a retired accountant or a school librarian who had always wanted to learn. She charged fair prices, and she was known across the neighborhood as someone with an extraordinary ear and an even more extraordinary patience. But love songs she avoided entirely. If a student asked to learn one, she would suggest something else, something classical, something technical, something that did not require her to feel anything she was not ready to feel. That changed on a Thursday evening in October when a man named Daniel Reeves called to ask about lessons. Daniel was 30 years old, and he explained on the phone that he had just moved to Nashville from Portland, Oregon for work, and that he had always regretted never learning to play. He had a calm and unhurried voice, and he spoke about music the way someone speaks about something they have loved from a distance for a very long time. Margaret told him she had one opening on Thursday evenings at 6, and he said that was perfect. He showed up exactly on time, wearing a gray jacket and carrying a small notebook, which Margaret thought was unusual. Most adult beginners showed up with nothing at all. From the very first lesson, it was clear that Daniel was not like her other students. He asked questions that went beyond technique. He wanted to know not just how to play a chord, but why that chord felt the way it did. He wanted to understand the architecture of emotion in music, and Margaret found herself answering him in ways she had not spoken to anyone in years. She talked about how a minor key does not always mean sadness, and how the space between notes can carry more meaning than the notes themselves. She talked about Harold once without planning to, and Daniel listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he simply said that it sounded like Harold had been a man worth missing. Margaret looked at the piano keys for a long moment and said, "Yes, he really was." The weeks passed, and Thursday evenings became the part of the week that Margaret looked forward to without fully admitting it to. Herself, Daniel improved quickly, but more than his progress. What surprised her was how much she had started to come alive again in that studio. He laughed easily and generously, and he had a habit of stopping in the middle of a difficult passage to say something like, "Okay, I felt something there. What was that?" And Margaret would explain, and something in the explaining felt like opening a window in a room that had been closed for a very long time. One evening in December, Daniel arrived with 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner. He handed her one without asking whether she wanted it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and sat down at the bench and said, "Margaret, I want to learn a love song." She felt her breath catch slightly. She had her usual deflections ready, but when she looked at him, something in his expression stopped her. He was not asking to be difficult. He was asking because he trusted her with something that mattered to him. So she sat down beside him on the bench, and she taught him the opening notes of a song she had not played in 6 years, and her hands did not shake the way she had always feared they would. They were steady and warm, and the music that came out of that old upright piano sounded like something returning from somewhere very far away. After the lesson, Daniel did not leave right away. He stayed, and they talked for almost an hour about Nashville and Portland and what it means to start over somewhere new, and whether it is ever too late to build the life you actually want. Margaret said she did not know the answer to that question. Daniel said he thought the answer was no, and the way he said it made her believe him completely. By February, they were meeting for coffee on Sunday mornings as well, and Margaret had started playing love songs again in the evenings after dinner, not for any student, but just for herself, and for the feeling that had quietly come back into the room. Her sister called one Sunday afternoon and said, "Margaret, you sound different," and Margaret said, "I suppose I do." Her sister asked if there was someone, and Margaret laughed a real laugh, the kind she had not heard from herself in longer than she could remember, and said, "I am not sure what it is yet, but something feels like spring." Daniel told her one evening in March, sitting on her porch with the hydrangeas just beginning to bud, that moving to Nashville had been the best decision of his life, and that a large part of the reason was sitting right next to him. Margaret looked at him for a long moment, and then looked at the garden, and then looked back at him and said, "Daniel, you are 30 years old." And he said, "I know exactly how old I am, Margaret, and I also know what I feel." She did not have an answer for that. She only knew that the silence that had lived inside her for 6 years had finally and completely lifted, and that the man sitting beside her on that old porch had somehow known exactly which notes to play to bring her back. You know, what stays with me most about Margaret and Daniel is not the age difference or what other people thought or did not think. It is the image of her sitting down at that piano bench on a December evening and playing a love song for the first time in 6 years, because someone asked her to, and because she finally felt safe enough to say yes. Sometimes that is all it takes. Someone who sits beside you and asks you to teach them everything you know, and in the teaching you find that you still have so much left to give. If this story moved you even a little bit, I want you to know that there are so many more like it right here on this channel. Stories about real people who found connection and warmth and love when they least expected it. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss one. And if you know someone who needs to hear that, it is never too late. Please share this with them. I will see you in the next one. And until then, take good care of yourself and the people around you.